Hello, everyone. This is Greg Hemmer with the Shardeum Foundation. Thank you for being here today. Wow, this is going to be a really exciting presentation. There's a theory that as technology ages, it's the ability to remove or eliminate that technology becomes significantly harder. And with decentralized protocols like Shardeum, their survivability should be extremely high. They're censorship resistant, and it should be extremely hard to eliminate a protocol like Shardeum. In 100 years from now, there should be millions of users using the Shardeum protocol. And today we're here to present a tool to you called the Shardeum Token Rewards Calculator, which you as the community will be able to use to help craft the node rewards issuance policy that will be used on this protocol. Millions of users will be using 100 years from now. So today we're here to take you through the agenda. If we could go to the next slide. In today's presentation, we'll introduce you to Shardeum's node rewards issuance model, which will be led by Shardeum Foundation's founders Nishal and Omar. We will be giving a presentation of the Shardeum node rewards calculator and demoing our theory and hypothesis for how the Shardeum issuance model should work, with background on the network and how the different unique features or traits that impact how the node issuance model will work. We'll talk about emissions and different parameters of this node issuance protocol, and also give a demo of a simulation of how node issuance will work over the next 5, 10, 50, 100 years. Please feel free to post your questions on the YouTube live stream during our presentation. And at the end, we'll have a period of time where we can answer your questions. So without ado, would love to introduce Shardeum's founders, Nishal and Omar.
Hey everyone. I think we're just checking. Are we visible to everyone? I can see a lot of comments saying it's not live. We are okay. All right. It's great to be here, and okay. I think there's a new link published on Twitter for those who are not able to join. Please, I think we can wait for a minute, Omar. I think there was some issue with the link. I think some people are on the new link and some are on the old one. Let me also just tweet it out. Just give me a minute. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Greg. So I think Omar will probably give a more detailed understanding of what we are trying to do. But just to give an overview, what we're going to release today is our tokenomics dashboard, where you'll be able to see how the node reward strategy on Shardeum is going to be. This is a work in progress, and this is something that the team has been working on for a long time. There's been a lot of research that has gone into it. We'll also probably share a couple of links where you can see and have a deeper understanding of why this was built and what were the challenges that we faced with some of the existing node reward strategies out there on the existing blockchains, and why Shardeum had to design a unique strategy around the node rewards. Um, I wouldn't take much time. Omar, do you want to give a brief overview before we get into the presentation?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, I just want to, say how amazing it is to see our community growing, and the excitement and support that everybody is giving to this project. Um, we can monitor and see all the nodes out there, which you guys probably can't see all of that, but there's like over 20,000 validator nodes running. This is probably the largest beta net that has ever been created at this earliest stage. So we're really excited, and there's been like new issues that we've encountered while allowing the community to run nodes, and we are actively working on fixing that. There's been some really nasty things that popped up, and it's been taking us a little while, and I want to thank everyone for their patience. And I know you guys are probably having a lot of issues with running the nodes and things like that right now. We're definitely aware of it, and we're working to make that whole experience much better, and things should be getting better soon. So I just wanted to mention that first. And then now about the node reward model, and the whole SHM tokenomics and issuance. This is something that we've been thinking about quite a bit. A lot of projects usually just like pick some sort of a schedule, and they just like issue their tokens out on that fixed schedule. But as Dan will explain to you here in a moment, for a sharded network, it's not that simple to just follow a fixed schedule. And Dan will explain the reasons why behind that. But so we had to really think through this a lot more than what other projects do, because we're actually a sharded network, and the choices that we made here were really going to impact how things will work out in the future. And our goal with this is to ensure that in the long run, we never get into a situation where the DAO that will eventually be overseeing this decentralized network will run into a problem where they won't have sufficient funding to keep the project going. We also wanted to make sure that long run, the validator nodes are always compensated in a way that essentially keeps them profitable. So there's a lot of things that we thought about and put into this model. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he'll explain the background and more details about it.
Cool, amazing. Let me just quickly share my screen, and we can get started. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, got that, cool. Thanks, Omar. First of all, thank you for everyone joining this this live stream. It's kind of an exciting time for us to be able to share how the issuance and tokenomics for Shardeum is going to work. It's something that we've spent a lot of time researching, and we've had an idea of how it would work for quite a long time, but it hasn't exactly been shared with the community yet, because we wanted to make sure it was kind of nailed down and bulletproof before we shared anything. So what you can see on my screen now, and let me just zoom in a little bit so it's a bit bigger for you guys on YouTube. This is the tokenomics dashboard, and ultimately this has a few different tabs. The first one I'm going to take you through is the background tab. These are basically things that the community really need to understand to be able to kind of make sense of a lot of the decisions we've made moving forward from, you know, why we chose this model, why is it an effective model to use. I'm going to go through some of this today on the call. I'm not going to just go through all of the details, because the reason this dashboard exists is for the community members to be able to go in here and absorb this information, and hopefully then have reassurances that the decisions that the Shardeum team have made in terms of issuance are the correct ones. So it gives full confidence in that. So
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
Before you get started, I was wondering, is it possible that you could use your browser's scale capability to see if you can expand that? There you go. Yeah,
Better?
keep doing that a little bit more if
No?
you can. Yeah, maybe one more even. Okay, great.
That looks big on my screen. That is on a 27-inch screen. That is some big copy. Cool. Is that better? Cool. Okay.
Yeah, it makes it readable now here.
Perfect. So, like I said, all of this this link will be well, technically it's available now if you were to look at the URL, but we'll share it at the end of the call, and you can take this all in your own time and make sense of it all. But for the purpose of now, I'm going to just quickly just zip through some of the key things, and then we'll jump into the kind of the more interesting stuff, which is what is our approach, how will it work, and how do we test and prove that it works in almost any given scenario, which is the key. So the first thing is basically just a quick explanation of what an FDAO is. So an FDAO in this case is just the same as a normal DAO, but initially this will be controlled by the foundation. And as we move through this, there'll be certain references to FDAO controls, which is things that the FDAO can vote on in order to essentially tweak network parameters to make sure that emissions are how we want them to be. It won't always be like that. So this FDAO will be planned to transition into a community DAO. So the community will be basically making these decisions in the longer term. Then there is this concept of stable price. So we often get asked the question of if we aim transaction fees to be 0.01 or whatever we decide them to be, how do we ensure when the price fluctuates that the transaction fees remain the same for a basic coin transfer, and that the staking requirement basically offsets in order to account for that change in essentially SHM price. So we have this concept of stable price, which is basically as the price changes, we have a stable price that will be an average of either a day's average on price or a 5-day average on price. That's just a solid price that isn't fluctuating by the second. And that is used to, I suppose, calculate everything else. So, for example, if the network goes live with a price of $1 per SHM, that would be, it would take this much 0.0100 SHM for an equivalent 0.1 US dollar transaction. And if it was $1,000 to stake, then that would be 1,000 SHM. As that was obviously go up over time, so go 2, 3, 4, whatever, this stable price will be used to calculate to make sure that the staking requirement in US dollars is what we want it to be, and also the transaction fee still comes out at the target transaction fee. So that's stable price. That'll be referred to quite a lot moving forward, so it's a good thing to know. And then one of the key differences, or one of the key terms that will come up over and over again, is the SA ratio, which is the standby to active validator ratio. This is a key kind of parameter or variable in all of the decisions we make moving forward. So pretty simply, it's the number of standby nodes we have to the ratio of active nodes. So if that was a 1-to-1 ratio, and we had 1,300 active nodes validating in the network, and we had 1,300 standby nodes, then that's a 1-to-1 ratio. If we had 2,600 standby nodes and 1,300 active nodes, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So just understanding what that ratio is on a basic level will make a lot of this make sense moving forward. The standby to active ratio itself has a couple of kind of like assumptions to be made about, or a couple of things that it impacts. So as the standby to active ratio goes up, which is what you can see in this graph here. So this is the example of 1,300 active nodes, 1,300 standby nodes, so 26 in total. 2-to-1 ratio, 3-to-1 ratio, 4-to-1 ratio, 5-to-1 ratio. So this is there's still always 1,300 active nodes in the network in this example, but the number of standby nodes is gone up by, well, a multiple each time that this active to standby validator ratio is changed. So what that means for, I suppose, people running nodes in the community is the higher that ratio, the less time in theory, if you base it all on mathematics and probability, you spend in the network. So at a 1-to-1 ratio, where there's 1,300 active nodes and 1,300 standby nodes, in theory, you would spend, which is the red line, about 50% of the time validating. And that would mean you would spend 50% of the time earning node reward, because only the active validators earn node rewards, the standby don't. And as that ratio goes up to a 2-to-1 ratio, the time you would spend validating would go down. So that's the first thing to kind of wrap your head around. The second is how the SA ratio actually impacts daily, monthly, yearly reward, or just reward generally. What happens is, as the ratio gets higher, in theory, the profitability for the operators of the validator nodes, the active validator nodes, kind of goes down. So just to go back a little bit here, as this ratio goes up, you spend less time actively validating in the network. If you spend less time actively validating the network, you spend less time earning node reward. So if I just get rid of all of these, all the different price points, and we just leave node reward as $1 an hour, you can see that as this standby ratio goes up, the amount of time each node spends validating goes down, and also the earnings of each validator would go down with that. So in theory, the lower the validator, the standby to active validator ratio, the more profitable the network is. The higher the ratio, the less profitable it is. And then the final kind of assumption on this is how all of this factors in, how the standby to active ratio impacts network cost. So I won't go through all of these examples as such, but I'll just use the graph. But the blue line here is basically the active to standby validator ratio is now being flipped. So the lowest number is now on the right side and the highest number is on the left side. But basically, the higher this standby to active ratio at a given APY. So if we say we're going to make sure that every single validator gets a yearly return of 20% at a given value, as that validator to standby ratio, that standby to active ratio increases, the cost to run the network increases with it. So there's a little example here that you've got a 1-to-1 ratio with 1,300 active nodes and 1,300 standby nodes. And if we say the APR percentage that we're going to give is 50%, this would mean that once you factor this out, so you basically do the total network, the total nodes in the network, and then we would then the cost of running that validator a day plus the 50% APY, it would mean the network hypothetically would cost at a 1-to-1 standby to active ratio $13,000. If it was a 2-to-1 ratio, so now we had 1,300 active nodes, 2,600 standby nodes, so 3,900 nodes in total, and you apply the exact same logic, the network would cost more to run. So just wrapping your head around this idea is that the higher that ratio is, the more expensive the network is to run. And then looking at node reward. So the node reward that is given out will depend, which we'll go through in a second, on how the FDAO and then the DAO eventually tweak certain parameters in the network. And at some point, the the cost of the network, the cost to run the network and the node reward intersect. And as you go down, this then gives you a standby to active ratio. And this is basically representing the maximum standby to active ratio that the network can sustain at a given APR, whether that's 10% or APY 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. So they're the three assumptions. And then there is a section here, which is why we don't follow a predefined issuance schedule. Now, this is a question that's come up in the community hundreds and hundreds of times, and hopefully in the next couple of minutes and with this dashboard, we can answer that. But basically, Shardeum's approach to scaling is a completely unique approach, or relatively unique. And with that, the issuance or the tokenomics policy needs to be unique also. So the first thing that to kind of, I suppose, wrap your head around to make all of this make sense is this horizontal versus vertical scalability. So this is all about how networks generate their TPS number. So a horizontally scaling network, such as Shardeum, the way it generates higher TPS is by adding more nodes to the network. So it scales horizontally. So having the ability to scale up is super, super crucial to a horizontally scaling network. Other networks that basically aren't sharded and they vertically scale, and by vertically scaling, and this is all explained in here, so go through it in your own time, it basically means just throwing more hardware at the validators. So that has a couple of things. If you go down that approach, what it means is that irrespective of how many active nodes, as long as there's more than one, the TPS doesn't change. The TPS of a vertically scaling network, so something like Solana, it's actually limited by the lowest performing node. So even if there's only one node, the TPS remains the same. If there's 100,000 nodes, the TPS remains the same. This concept, along with the kind of the standby to active ratio, is kind of key in this, explaining why we've gone down the route we have. So I suppose the key takeaway from this section is, for a horizontally scaling network like Shardeum, the ability to be able to control this, the number of active nodes and the standby to active ratio, is critically important. Whereas for these vertically scaling networks, not as important, because if they go down to one node, their TPS stays the same. They may kind of lose decentralization, but nothing kind of happens with the network. So there's a couple of examples here to what may happen if Shardeum, which is a horizontally scaling sharded network, was to go down one of these kind of pre-existing, predefined issuance schedules. So there's a couple of well-trodden paths on this, and these are basically a node reward schedule that is scaling. So this is one basically represents Bitcoin, where 100% of the reward is given out for around about 4 years. I know it's actually a number of blocks, but for the purposes of this, around 4 years, and then it scales down. And then there is the linear approach, where it's basically just a flat number of the native token is given out on a daily, weekly, yearly basis until maximum supply is reached, or if there's a burn mechanism, equilibrium is found. When we looked at this, and this was one of the kind of where we started, do we just follow what everyone else does? We very quickly realized that this could potentially spell disaster for Shardeum in terms of kind of essentially the operation of the network. So we took lots and lots of chains data, but for the or lots of network data, but for the purposes of this, the examples that I give are Ethereum and Algorand. And the reason we're using these is because Ethereum demonstrates a pretty bull case on price action, i.e. the price through the roof. Whereas Algorand shows a pretty bear case where the token went live, or the coin, the native asset went live at a certain price, and actually then it went down for a period of time. So what that shows is that if we assume that Shardeum has a set number of validators, and then we just use, on the left-hand side, Ethereum's price action, and Ethereum's transaction volumes. What you'll notice here very quickly is that there is these crazy times of APR return. So you just get this massive fluctuation in potential APY return, where you can get like something like 80,000, 90,000, which is obviously ridiculous. So you get this massive fluctuation in APY return. So in the bull case, what it means is that the APY goes through the roof, which essentially, well, we'll get onto this in the next section, but that essentially would have knock-on effects for Shardeum because the architecture is different, back to that horizontally scaling kind of description. But then in the bear case, what you should see, or what you will be able to see when you look at this, is it's probably quite small. But anyway, 0 is here. So anything below this line is a negative APR. So in theory, in this case, the node operators are running at a loss. And again, just to, I suppose, reiterate the point, for these networks that are vertically scaling, that aren't sharded and don't really scale, that doesn't really matter if they run negative APR, because the effect of that will be then they'll lose nodes from their network, but their TPS will stay the same. If that was to happen to Shardeum, what would happen? The TPS would go down, go down, go down, go down, go down, go down, and potentially that would mean that the network couldn't scale like it would need to. And consequently, if the APR went or the APY went through the roof, like in the Ethereum example, you would just have this network that was capable of crazy TPS that it didn't need yet. So it would be inefficient because you would be paying so many more kind of people to sit in standby. They don't get paid in standby, but when you work in the overall APY calculation, which I'll show in a second, it basically means you get an inefficient network. So to actually put that into some type of practice, which is the last bit on this this background before we move into some of the more interesting stuff, so bear with. The explanation of APY here is not how this would actually manifest itself in the real world in Shardeum. What would actually happen is the APY would find equilibrium. It wouldn't actually ever get this high, because instead what would happen, if certain node providers were getting crazy APY, loads of people would click onto that, and then loads of people would join the network, and it would have lots and lots and lots and lots of nodes. What that would mean in reality is the standby to active ratio would go through the roof in the bull case. So this is using the Ethereum data again. And basically what it's shown is that using the Ethereum data, that the standby to active validator ratio, if the price action goes up using a pre-scheduled model, like I explained earlier, the network would be able to maintain a crazy standby to active ratio and still be profitable. So for example, based on Ethereum price, there would be a time when Ethereum was at its peak price that the network could handle a 32,000 to 1 standby to active validator ratio, which is incredibly inefficient, because there's no point having all of that hardware just sitting there that's basically never going to get, or barely ever get, cycled into the network. Then on the bear case, and this is a lot more important to kind of wrap your head around, is in the bear case, when you have negative APY, nodes will leave the network if they're not profitable. Why would they run a validator node if it's costing them $100 a month, but they're only getting $50 a month back? They're just going to stop validating, right? So with a predefined issuance schedule, like a Bitcoin or Ethereum with halving, or some like a linear version, like more like what NIA do, if the price was to go down rather than go up and be a bit of a bear case, you'd get these times where the network, and right at the bottom here, it isn't even capable of sustaining a 1-to-1 standby to active ratio. And what that would mean if that happens is that the network would, first of all, would have reduced security, because as the standby ratio goes up, as the standby to active ratio, the likelihood of nodes being cycled into the active nodes is lower. So then essentially it's more secure, the network. But more importantly, the network would lose its ability to scale if it needed to. So if it all of a sudden needed to scale to 2, 3, 4 times the TPS, if it wasn't profitable, then we wouldn't have the nodes sitting in standby to be able to scale up, which would obviously be a disaster. So hopefully that gives a bit of an explanation as to some of the key things to wrap your head around. Also some of the kind of what the SA ratio is, what impact it has, but most of all, why we had to come up with a new tokenomics strategy. So moving on, I'm going to go over this emissions later on if we have time, but it's not too important for now. In the essence of time, I'm going to go into this parameters section. What this parameters section is basically every variable that impacts node income and network income. And I'm not going to explain all of these in detail because we'll just run out of time. But in the dashboard, go into any of these. Every single one of these is explained in depth, what it is, what it impacts. But also the calculations at the bottom are all basically, they have a description of exactly what is impacting the calculation. There's probably two things to take away from this. Well, there's probably three things. The first thing is that you can play around with this. And as you play around with this, it will all update in real time. So for example, you can't see because I want to zoom out, but basically if we increase the numbers of nodes per shard, then the total number of nodes that would be required in the network would go up, or if we reduce it, it would go down. As these variables change, this all updates dynamically to give you an idea of what changing each parameter affects. The other thing to take away, the other key thing, or the two other key things, is the market APY. So what we are saying is, rather than having a predefined issuance, kind of, we're going to give this many tokens out per day, what we see is, well, how we're going to work this is that we will look at the market APY initially and say, if you were to put your stake, which in this case is $1,000, into another investment like a bond or something like that, or into some of the valid investment, what APY could you get? And we'll try and match that initially, or potentially give you higher if we need to in terms of a return. The APY that you get is the first thing, and the second thing is this standby to the standby ratio. So this is the standby to active ratio you can see here. As a lot of these parameters change, so as kind of say we now say, well, okay, we need a higher 3.75 isn't high enough. So this is basically saying at 10% APY, we would be able to sustain with these current settings a 3.73 standby to active ratio. But we may say, well, actually that isn't enough. So then these variables can be changed. So node reward per hour could be changed to $2 an hour rather than $1 an hour. And that would then mean this standby ratio would go up. Consequently, we might run a network that's a bit inefficient. So say, for example, I don't know, we've got a 22 ratio. We can then, the FDAO, which is what I explained was before, they have controls over these parameters here. And by changing these parameters, it can impact this standby ratio. But more importantly, it impacts the network income. So if you look at the revenue per day, the revenue per day of the network is calculated by the daily transaction volumes multiplied by the transaction fee. So if you look here, it's a bit hard to see because I can't really zoom out. Let me just, for this one example, zoom out. It's going to be really small, but don't worry about the numbers too much. But basically, as the transaction fee increases, the revenue per day of the network goes up. Pretty simple. The expense per day, the calculation is active nodes multiplied by the node reward, multiplied by the node reward per hour, multiplied by 24 to give it on a daily basis. So as the node reward goes up, so 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it may be, the expense per day of the network goes up. And the final takeaway from this page before we move on to the simulations is these numbers here, the revenue per day, which is generated by the number of daily transactions multiplied by the transaction fee, which the FDAO can control, minus the expense per day, which is the cost of basically running paying the nodes to run a certain TPS, gives us an income per day, which gives us a network delta. If the expense per day, so the amount that we paying nodes per day to run the network, is less than the revenue that the network is generating per day from transaction fees, because we burn 100% of the transaction fees, that would mean that the supply of SHM is actually, it's decreasing. It's basically negative at that point. If we make the node reward higher, you'll see now the delta is negative. If the delta is negative down here, then the expense per day for running the network is more than the revenue the network generates per day, which means we are issuing more SHM to node providers than we are burning in transaction fees. Neither of those is a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing that we can manipulate in order to make sure that the SHM supply basically finds equilibrium and it never ever reaches max supply, and that there's always SHM to give out to node providers. So moving on, simulations page. So I'm going to zoom back in. But this is basically how we prove let me just zoom in first while I explain it. This is how we prove to ourselves, but more importantly to you guys, that more or less whatever we throw at this, the network can find equilibrium in terms of the amount of SHM that's issued. And like I said, there's always SHM to give out to node providers, so we can always maintain a healthy standby to active ratio, which means we can always scale and that the network will remain healthy for more or less an indefinite period of time. So these exact same parameters are all available here to be changed, but in this case, we have two other files. So we've got a price file, which we can basically just take a price file. We've pre-uploaded some for you here, but for example, if we take Ethereum for the price file and we take Ethereum for the transaction file. So this is per day, the price of Ethereum, and this is per day, the transaction volumes of Ethereum. It will then factor in all of these variables here. And if we run the simulation, it will tell us here exactly how that would play out in the Shardeum world. So you can see here, just to explain what we can see, let me just knock some of these off, make it simpler. The purple line is the most important line. This is the supply line. So this is basically saying initially when the network goes live, we have a minimum number of nodes. So irrespective of the TPS that we need to throughput, we're going to say, and it's a variable you can change down here if you want to, but for now it's set to 600. We'll never drop less than 600 nodes. So initially, when the TPS is quite low, so the amount of transactions is quite low, so the network revenue is quite low, we'll still be paying at least 600 nodes in this example. So at first, lots and lots of SHM gets issued here, and then it will find its equilibrium point. So you can see with Ethereum data, it's finding its equilibrium point here. So you see, this is the peak supply of 3.32 million. If you were to tweak this up to say like 3, and you rerun this now, the peak supply would then change based on the variables that you input. So feel free to play around with that. The other key things you can see in here. So the red line is the price data on a daily basis, which we took from Ethereum. The transaction data is the green line, which we've in this case taken from Ethereum. And then the one line I haven't got yet, which is the purple line, is basically saying if we have, and this comes back to that horizontal versus vertical scaling again. If we were to have Ethereum's transaction volumes, how many nodes would we need to have in our network to be able to process those? So that's what that is. So you'll see, what you should see is more or less in the vast majority of situations, if you just run this, you'll see that the supply doesn't go crazy, but in the vast majority, if you use, let's just go through a few of these quick. In the vast majority, you'll find equilibrium, or you'll find something close to equilibrium, basically, irrespective of what you use. So you can upload whatever you want. So you see if we use Polygon, which in this case is Matic, and then Polygon's transaction volumes, again, we're more or less finding equilibrium. What is interesting, so like I said, what this is demonstrating is more or less whatever you use here, the network kind of by itself finds equilibrium in terms of burning and issuing SHM. But you can come up with examples, what's a good one? So Algorand and Binance, where it, is that not a good one? Hold on, I'm trying to find, I changed this. Sorry, I've changed the parameters, making my own demonstration not make sense. So you see in this example, if you take away everything else, the supply goes up and then the supply goes back down again. And obviously, this is not what we want to happen. So in most cases, ideally, irrespective of what happens, nothing needs to be changed by the FDAO in order for it to find equilibrium. But if we do get some kind of crazy price versus transaction numbers, we can just change these parameters and then we rerun this. And then there you go. So now we've got an inclined supply around about 120 million after a set amount of days. A couple of takeaways from this is it uses the first 2,000 days of each of these networks data if they have it. So something like Ethereum has 2,000 days. If you start to mix and match these and there isn't 2,000 days worth of data, and you mix like Ethereum that's got 2,000 days or more than, and then Polygon that's got like 1,000, it will just cut it off to 1,000 days. So if you see anything like that, that's why that would happen. And then a couple of other things you're able to do. I've zoomed out because you can toggle this to get it on full screen, which is kind of nice, which is potentially how I should have done this demo. And then you can download this too. And then you'll get a version of this you can take away. You don't have to keep rerunning this. And then the final thing I want to just quickly say is that you're not limited to this. So how this works is it's basically using text files, and you can upload whatever you want in a custom file. So if you say to me, I don't want to follow any chain in history that's happened, I actually want to I think what's going to happen is going to be nuts. We're going to have a bazillion transactions and the price is going to go down, or the price is going to go through the roof and the transactions are going to be low, yada, yada, yada. If I just show you one of these, how it actually is uploaded, it's just a TXT file, and each line represents a day. So you can go in here, you can upload your own file, play around with it, see what happens, see if you find equilibrium. If you don't find equilibrium automatically, I guarantee you can change some of these parameters and you can find equilibrium. So yeah, that was it. The very final thing, just for 1 second, is just this tab here is about the emissions of the network. So the 49% that's going to be given out at day one across the foundation, the ecosystem, the team, the sale. So this is that in a token version, and then in a percentage-based version. Key thing is that there is 51% of the native asset SHM to be given out, max to be given out by the network, but it is max, and hopefully based on the simulations, we have proven that max supply never ever gets reached. And then the very final thing is just how it comes into existence. So some of the SHM that gets given out in that 49% is available and is liquid immediately. So for example, the foundation in the ecosystem, that SHM is available and it's liquid immediately. But some of the ecosystem and sale SHM has vesting periods. So that means there's a 90-day vesting period, then there's a cliff for 720 days. And then the blue line here is just the full liquid supply of the 49% that's given out, excluding node rewards. And it just shows how that's going to become liquid over time. That's it from me. I think hopefully I've covered everything. Omar, feel free to jump in, or Nishal if I haven't covered everything or I've missed anything. So yeah, I'll hand back over if that's all right.
And if Greg is here, maybe he can see if there's any questions in Telegram.
Yeah, we can do that. And thanks a lot, Dan, for this. And I think I was checking out a lot of those the comments. I think one of the things is it's a lot to digest for people, and you know, for that matter, this session will anyways be available on YouTube. And I think once we share the link, everyone can go to the link. You can go to the dashboard. There's a lot of explanation about each of these sections. But we are happy to answer any questions you know, people have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Great presentation, Dan. So Omar, just a few clarification questions. So could we reiterate the difference between standby and active nodes?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way the Shardeum network operates is that there'll be a number of nodes that are actively involved in the consensus and processing of the transactions, and there can be nodes that are outside of this group which want to join and participate, and so those nodes would be sending a join request, and periodically some random nodes are picked that are in standby and allowed to join the network, and some nodes that are already in the network are cycled out. And one of the benefits of that is that it increases our footprint of decentralization, right? So our network is not just, let's say, 1,000 nodes that are active. It could be 1,000 nodes plus another 4,000 nodes that are in standby. So now our total decentralization footprint is 5,000 nodes. So that helps to increase the decentralization level. But it's also good when you have situations where you suddenly get a spike of transactions and the network needs to have more nodes to help process that. So the network can, bring in more nodes and maybe grow, say, like to 2,000 nodes. And then, when that spike of transactions dies down, then it will automatically shrink back down. The design is done this way in order to maximize the efficiency of the network, because if you have a network where you have way more nodes that are actively involved in the network than what the network really needs for your TPS, then you have to pay all of those nodes, and it's not as efficient. So that's the whole concept behind standby and active nodes.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about standby and active is the fact that in most existing networks today, it's not a very efficient use of resources. You could be paying hundreds of thousands of validators, but do you really need those validators? It's eventually you have too much redundancy and resources in the network. And also, it's really cool that the active validator node operators are rotating to maximize decentralization. So I think the next question is the one on screen here. Will standby nodes earn rewards, Omar?
Yeah, so that was something that we actually looked at and thought a lot about and debated whether to have standby nodes receive rewards. And we kept coming to these weird game theory situations where, effectively, if we did give standby nodes a reward, you could get into a situation where somebody wants to game the system, where they don't actually want to have their node actively participate and do work, but they'll allow it to be in standby mode and earn those rewards. And then if it gets, pulled into the network, they just leave and never show up. Right. So we were running into, how do we then, what should we do? How do we penalize those nodes? And, all these kind of things are popping up that were becoming issues. So we just decided that, what, I think the best thing to do is just pay the nodes that are active. And eventually, because we have rotation, all the nodes will get a chance to be active and earn a reward. And so we decided that we would just pay the active nodes, and that would effectively be the same as really paying all of the nodes that are there.
Yeah, and I think this is also step one, which is where we've done this, but I'm pretty sure as we progress, we'll come up with new ways. But yeah, in a way, the answer is there is no direct reward for standby. But if you look at it, you're a standby node, but you'll also become an active, and the reward in active is adjusted such that the time that you spend on standby gets rewarded as well. So in a way, we do have an indirect reward for standby. But over time, we'll definitely figure out if there are better ways to reward standby nodes. But right now, there's no direct way. There is an indirect way where active nodes earn more when they're active.
I think at the end of the day, if it's profitable and you're earning more than you're spending, whether you're in standby or not, isn't a huge factor to everyone, as long as they can help participate in decentralization and aren't losing money in the process. So that brings up another question. Klaus here is thinking about running a node on mainnet, but not sure how much the machine to operate a validator will cost. Omar, what are the expected costs for operating a node?
Yeah, if we looked at places like AWS and Linode and other places where you can get like, really professional web hosting services done. And, for about 20 cents per hour, you can get a pretty decent system. It'll have like 16 gigabytes of RAM, 8 cores of processors, hundreds of gigabytes of SSD storage. So that kind of a system would definitely be well suited to be able to run in the network. In fact, you could probably get by with something even less than that. But for 20 cents an hour, you can get a really decent system. And if we, set, depending on, knowing that, we will definitely set our node rewards to be, much more than that, right? So like $1, $2, $3, things like that. So there'll be lots of margin for node operators to be profitable.
Cool. There's been a few questions about if people can change the VPS they're using for their node from one to another while the node is already staked. I guess what's the process of switching VPS providers?
I really don't know the answer to that one. That's something that would have to try out and see what happens. But if your IP address and port were to stay the same, then yeah, you could switch that node to especially if it's within the same ISP. If they move your node from one computer to another, but they keep your IP and port the same, then it should work, and you shouldn't see any kind of issue with your node.
Got it. Yeah, I think the general standard of procedure would just be to stop your node, maybe remove the stake, switch to a new cloud provider, and then connect your wallet there and stake with that. I imagine changing cloud providers will probably result in the IP address potentially changing as well.
Yep.
Here's another question. What's the minimum number of nodes to have an optimal network? I think this is a pretty broad question, but maybe this is where we can explain in farther detail again, active validators and how the number is calculated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in terms of the active number of nodes that we want in the network, we want to adjust that based on what is the actual TPS load on the network, right? But we also don't want that number to get too low because we want to have sufficient number of nodes to maintain decentralization. So after running these simulations, we were able to see that for a lot of these daily transaction volumes that previous networks before us have encountered, we could get by with about 600 nodes for quite a while before the network actually had to add more nodes because the transaction volume increased. So we've chosen to use a number like 600 nodes as an approximate number of the minimum number of nodes we would have in the network. Now, that will increase as the TPS of the network goes up. And if the TPS of the network goes down, it'll also shrink back down, but it'll never get below that minimum number.
Great. So there will always be a minimum of 1280 active validators in the network. Another question is, will Shardeum be able to keep transaction fees low if the SHM price goes high? Dan, what are your thoughts on that? How can we keep fees low even if the price of SHM continues to rise?
I think there's probably two parts to that. I think because we're using this stable price and everything is basically, from a technical perspective, is working back through that stable price, irrespective of what happens to price, the transaction fee should always come out at the same US dollar amount. And then the other part of that is probably one of the byproducts of this approach. This approach is kind of, it's great in the respect that if the network starts to become really profitable and we have too many nodes, too many standby nodes, and we decide we can have less standby nodes, as the FDAO or the DAO, if it's further down the line, can tweak that number, basically reduce the reward of the network in order to bring that standby to active ratio down. It'll ultimately be the most efficient nodes that remain in the network at the end, because the nodes that are basically costing more to run, their APR will be lower. So as the network kind of, the reward goes down to reduce that standby to active ratio, the inefficient nodes are probably going to be the ones that leave first. So what it means is you end up with an incredibly efficient network. So when you look at that revenue, the cost to run the network per day, because the network is basically constantly striving to have the most efficient nodes, we should be able to run a network that's actually crazily efficient in terms of the price to TPS, which should ultimately mean transaction fees. And you can work this through the calculator sometimes, where I'm not saying this will happen, but the scenarios where it becomes so efficient that you can start to reduce the transaction fees because you're burning so much SHM that you can reduce the transaction fees to then keep, that's a method of maintaining equilibrium. So I think a combination of obviously the stable price and obviously this issuance approach, I think is really good at just driving an efficient network. Like, what's the point of having 10,000 nodes sitting there when we don't need 10,000 nodes? We reduce that down, we keep the efficient one. So I think that'll be the key to this.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. Omar, so you only earn rewards when your node becomes active. So there's a lot of people curious about how does the Shardeum determine, which nodes get to become active? Does it depend on the SHM token staked, or is it completely random?
Yeah, it's completely random. So
why did we design it that way?
Well, I mean, that basically gives us the highest level of decentralization. So, we don't want to have somebody that can just stake a lot of SHM to be able to have a much higher representation in the network, because if you did that, then it would be easier for an adversary to, just beat out what the average amount that people stake is, and then be able to have a greater than 51% representation in the network. So with this model where it's completely random, it's much harder for an adversary to try to take over the network that way. And also, if you think about it, it adds that gamification effect to it, like, in the Bitcoin world where, all these nodes are sitting there trying to produce the next block, and one of them gets lucky and boom, hits this jackpot of producing a block and earning a bunch of, reward for doing that. Likewise, you're going to be watching your dashboard and seeing that, oh, wow, look, my node just went active, cha-ching, and I'm, starting to see my node reward going up, and, it'll be a fun and interesting thing that way. And so it's similar to other networks as well.
Yeah, it's definitely been the gamification piece has definitely been a really cool part of Sphinx, our beta net. Already seeing like a lot of memes being posted by the community, making jokes about when your node goes active, and some funny image of someone really excited. I personally get a lot of excitement when I check in on my dashboard from time to time and see my nodes active. It just feels really cool. Another question is, to upgrade a node, is there a way to keep the old public key rather than wiping everything and making a new public key?
Yeah, definitely. We're working on that because, we do want to allow you to have the option to maintain that public key that you had before. right now we didn't want to write that to disk just because it could be a security issue. But then if we do write it and we encrypt it, then it kind of adds this burden of having to enter a password every time you start your node again. But we're working towards making that possible, and while also making the experience friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's one of the reasons why we're so grateful for everyone running nodes and providing all this feedback, because helps us understand
Absolutely.
the UX stuff we need to work on and, different features we need to build. So, the ability to just keep your public key and upgrade your validator client is definitely something that will be built prior to mainnet. Nishal, like this question would be good for you. So right now in BetaNet, we have so many node operators, like 36,000 node operators currently in Sphinx, I believe. So there's a ton of nodes on standby and only a few active nodes. And I think because of that, like some people are sitting on standby maybe for a few days without becoming active. So like, what do you think will change in the UX between now and when mainnet is live, so that maybe people might become active a bit more often, and be able to participate in the network a little bit more?
Yeah, I think so we can. I think if you think about the BetaNet right now, one of the things when we launched, and Omar can probably put some more color into this, but we did not expect I think even thousands of nodes to run, and we tested with maybe 500 nodes, I think, because it's expensive to run nodes, and we decided that it's all working well, and we went live with the BetaNet, and we were surprised to see within 24 hours of the BetaNet, there were 1,000+ nodes that became active, and that started giving us a lot of feedback on what happens when a network grows. And while it was still okay, but that 1,000 grew to 10,000, and now it's 25,000 plus. And this is something I think that team is trying to understand and make it better. But I would probably hand it over to Omar. Omar, if you can shed some light on what's going to be the progress, what is the team trying to do right now, so that and I think the reason why one is active to standby, it's obvious that, I think our network transactions right now only need 1,000 nodes, so that's 1,000 active, and that's 25,000 nodes who are standby. And I think this,
Right.
if I'm not wrong, the switching is slower than what we can do as we proceed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, go on.
Like right now, we just have a very small number of nodes that can rotate at a time. But we could, for example, up that to 10 or 20 nodes can rotate in and out every minute. And so if you even did 10 nodes per minute, you would be going through almost 15,000 nodes being rotated through the network per day. So that gives more nodes a chance to have participated within a 24-hour period.
Yep. Just to chime in as well, I think the shard size is currently smaller than what it'll be at mainnet. So the required redundancy for every address right now is only about 20 nodes per address, but at mainnet it'll be 128 active validators per address. So the minimum required number of nodes in the network at all times, and the required redundancy factor will increase, which will result in more active nodes needing to be in the network. And while we want extremely rapid growth and, our node operator community, we love having a massive amount of node operators. It's extremely affordable on BetaNet because the stake is free, and, we don't have slashing implemented yet, so people can use very affordable machines. So I personally am expecting at mainnet maybe growth in the node operator community to be a bit more sustainable and steady rather than extremely rapid. And so I think those are a few reasons why in mainnet, you'll have more time active in the network. And of course, we have a really talented engineering team that will always pay attention to the data coming in and make adjustments as necessary based on the data we're seeing.
Yeah, see, I think also it's amazing to see so many queries around Node. And one of the things to understand is that I think most of the people are running Node for the first time, including a lot of us, because we've made it so easy and so accessible for everyone to run a node. So there's definitely going to be a lot of questions, we understand, and there's going to be a lot of doubts, queries on how do you run a node. So one of the things that we would do with time is just keep making things easier. I think we'll also have a more comprehensive FAQ page where you can all learn. We'll also work on getting community to create more videos that make it easy. And over time, I'm pretty sure, while it's difficult today to understand, I think we should reach a stage where running a node is very natural for everyone, because that's true decentralization. What has happened today is running a node is in the domain of businesses and just a few people. What we are trying to do is make it really easy and accessible so that running a node is as simple as having a transaction on the blockchain itself. We want everyone to participate. So keep those feedbacks coming. We are learning, and we are going to make it easier and easier for everyone to run a node on Shardeum. That's definitely, it's just getting better and better. So that's our focus. Make it easy for all of you to run a node.
Awesome. I think we're coming up on the end of the presentation here. One other good question is, there's a question about the minimum stake required for running a node, which is something we didn't cover in this presentation today. Omar, where are we at on determining the minimum stake, and I guess what's the current hypothesis?
Well, it'll definitely be way less than what some of these other networks require. And it'll also be a fixed amount in terms of, like, say, US dollar. So, it won't be a situation where, like, we say, oh, you need 1,000 SHM. But then if the price of SHM goes to $100, then it ends up being like, oh, man, it's like $100,000 that I need in order to stake SHM or to run a node. But, because we're gonna set everything in terms of a stable currency price, the amount of SHM that you will actually need will also be less, right? So, for example, when the network initially starts, we may have a fairly low staking amount, like, maybe $10 even, and then, $100, and then maybe, we might go to $1,000 as, as the TVL on the network increases. We also have to increase that staking amount and make sure that the people that are running validators have a vested interest in the network, and, in the good, participating in a way that ensures, honest nodes are in the network. So with that though, but, the nice thing is that amount that you need to stake won't continue to rise if the price of SHM rises. You'll never be, like, left out and feel like, oh man, I didn't start on this network early on, and so now it's too late for me to join. We'll try to keep a stable price of what that is. But, long term, that's going to be up to the DAO then. Like, you guys will decide. Initially, the foundation may be making those decisions, but over time, you as the community are going to be able to set what the stake amount should be for running a validator node.
Awesome. Thank you, Omar. And just in the sake of time, I'll say a few things. So there's a lot of questions also about, does more stake equal more validator rewards? Part of the reason why we've made it so easy for anyone to, install our validator and run their own node is because Shardeum is the first blockchain where the speed of the network is relative to the number of nodes. So we need to make it easy for people to run lots of nodes if they'd like. You can run more than one node, and so with that, there won't be more rewards issued for staking more than the minimum required, because the network needs to be designed to incentivize adding stake to run more validators rather than just increasing the stake of one validator node itself. There's also a few questions about or comments about previous challenges, getting a node staked recently on Sphinx. Just wanted to mention, we've received such great adoption from the community and really pushed the networks to limits we've never been able to achieve before internally, that it's helped discover new bugs, which is amazing because that's the purpose of the testnet. If you've had issues, staking recently, we're continuing to make progress on those bugs. Please keep trying from time to time, and you should be able to get the node staked. And, this is a test net. So at the end of the day, we're trying to push the network to its limits now to create these issues so we can find and resolve these bugs prior to mainnet. So when we get to mainnet, everything is stable and you don't experience issues like the ones you're currently facing. So Dan, thanks so much for your presentation today. Now that the community has access to this node reward calculator, I guess, what's the URL for it? And if they have creative ideas on how we can improve, our node issuance strategy or any insightful feedback, how can they share that with us?
Yeah, so this is now already live on the Shardeum domain at /SHM-tokenomics. There's an MS form that the marketing team have. There on screen, good timing. There's a form that we want both bugs to be reported in and feature requests. So I suppose the ask to the community is, go and use this. Hopefully it makes sense. Hopefully it's insightful. Let us know if you find any bugs. It's mobile responsive, so use it on mobile devices. Upload custom files to it, do whatever you want to it. If something doesn't work, please report it. If there's something that isn't explained perfectly, please let us know and we'll try and explain it more thoroughly or in a different way. And if there's feature requests, things that you would like to see in the future, please log them in that form and we'll use those moving forward to create a roadmap for this dashboard.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, please check out Twitter and Discord. We'll make sure the Google form is posted there for you to provide feedback. I think this is a really once in a lifetime opportunity to participate in the launch of a new blockchain that in the future will have millions of users and be live 100 years from now. So really cool opportunity to, have a say in designing the node issuance strategy. And we would love everyone's feedback. Thanks so much for everyone tuning in today. For those that are here live now, you can claim a POAP only within the next 5 minutes. We will pin the POAP form link in the YouTube comments. Within the next 5 minutes, you need to submit the form and you'll receive a POAP. Thanks again, everyone, so much for all your attention today, and enjoy the rest of your week.